So let's take our Bibles. Let's come to our continued study in the Gospel of Mark, and we are in Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. And as we come to this chapter, it's always important to realize, like any chapter, how it all connects together and it all fits together. And what I'd like you to do is to at least notice as we get started this morning, and it's what I have at the heading of my Bible. Mark 14 is a chapter of preparations for the cross. It's about Jesus preparing for what's going to happen in just a matter of a few hours, and Mark is going to detail each of those hours and everything that's being done for that particular moment for which he has come. And that is to die on the cross for the sins of the world, for your sin, for my sin. Now, when you think about preparations, we are all very much accustomed to preparing for things, right? I think in my life, in my ministry, of all the couples who have prepared to get married, they get engaged, they get the rings, they plan the wedding, they pick the venue, they decide on the honeymoon, and off they go. Hopefully everything worked out the way they prepared it. We planned then sometimes where we are going to live. We check out an area we might like to live in, the cost of those homes. We look at our finances to see if it's affordable. Is there a good church there? We just prepare and we plan for things like that. Maybe sometimes you plan for children and then you replan. I remember one time when our kids were younger, we have three, Josiah, Rebecca, and Tori. We said, we're going to change your names to Eeny, Meeny, Miny, and we ain't having no mo. We was rethinking our plan. And that was all in jest, by the way. They know. But people, we plan for that. We plan for people to come over to our house. We work to prepare things just to get the right meal, clean everything up, put everything in its place. And we're hoping that we have people over all the time, because that's a great thing that happens when we prepare and plan for people to come over. We plan sometimes to wait for a doctor's report. We get a weather alert and we start preparing. We get the batteries, we get the flashlights. If you have a generator, you get the fuel, you get milk. You sure got to get your bread and milk. So you are ready. And on we prepare. And in life, there is that moment which is one of the most difficult moments in life to prepare for, and it's that thing called death. I found it really interesting over the last couple of weeks, as I'm sure you did as you watched possibly all of the events unfolding with the death of Queen Elizabeth, which were the outworking of a lot of preparations. That preparation had a title called Operation London Bridge. It was the code name that she would use, which she chose for the signal that she had died, and her plans for her funeral and everything would begin to start being put in place when they realized that Operation London Bridge was in place. Every queen or king before chooses their own code name, and King Charles would choose his. It's just a way that they have to put into place all the things that took place. And I found it very, very interesting. When that took place, though we observed on the outside, what it was a reflection of was a lot of detailed planning and a lot of preparation. And I mean, every minute was planned. Things such as this right here. At 6:30, the final members of the public could be admitted to the lying-in state. At 10:44, not 10:45, but at 10:44 to 10:52, not 10:55, but at 10:52, the coffin would transfer from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey. At 11 a.m., the funeral would begin. Every speaker would be scheduled a time with a script. At 11:55, the bugle call to the British infantry would be heard. At 12:01, the coffin would proceed to Hyde Park. At 3:06, not 3:05, not at 3:10, at 3:06 to 3:52, the coffin would arrive at Windsor Castle in St. George's Chapel. At 3:40, King Charles and Queen Camilla and the rest of the family would join the procession, and at 4, the Queen's committal service would begin. That's just a sampling of preparations for a death. Well, that brings us to a death that I want us to begin to look at in chapter 14 of Mark. In this chapter here, this is a chapter that is about preparations for the death of the Son of God on a cross. In the place, and for sinners on their behalf. And as you think about Mark chapter 14, everything really up to this chapter has been preparing us for us. It's about preparations. The first 13 chapters of Mark are all preparatory to what's taking place here in chapter 14. All of his authoritative teaching in those chapters, all the supernatural miracles that they had witnessed, the prophecies that have been told about him and fulfilled by him, and the prophecies that really pointed to his ultimate destruction of the temple and his teaching and the coming again of Christ. All of that is preparatory to get us up to chapter 14. And as we entered chapter 14 last week with Pastor Zach, we saw that begins some preparation. There's preparation in that chapter 14 of evil men who are preparing to seize him and kill him. Mary's even that extravagant love that she did when she poured out the costly perfume on Jesus' head in verses 3 through 9 of chapter 14, that was preparatory. Matthew tells us in his account of this evening that she did that to prepare his body for burial. And an amazing turn of preparations took place in chapter 14 when all the evil men are preparing to seize and kill him. They're looking for the opportunity to get him. And Mary shows her love in preparation for his death and his burial. Something strange happens. One of his own, Judas, prepares in verses 10 and 11 to go and betray him. That would have been a shocking moment to the religious leaders. They would have never imagined that the word that was on the street, we're looking for Jesus, let us know where he is. If anyone knows, tell us. They would have never, ever envisioned that one of his very own would have come and turned him in. But it's all preparatory. Now, something changes here as we come to this chapter. It's preparatory. Up to this point, preparations, though divinely orchestrated. In other words, what Judas did wasn't ultimately something he was in charge of. And then what the religious leaders would do to find him, capture him, take him to a cross, and do all that they did to him ultimately wasn't their doing. Up to this point, all the preparations have been by others. But now something changes in verse 12. And Jesus himself is the one doing the preparations. And it all centers around a thing called the Passover, which had a lot of preparations to get ready for. So in our passage here, the focus is now going to be not on what Judas has done, not on what the evil men, the scribes, are going to do. It's going to be on him. And him preparing and him doing something that really draws our attention in verses 12 through 25 to him as he prepares something. And prepares them ultimately for a meal that we will observe at the end of this service that has been being observed for several thousand years. And preparing them to do that until the day comes when he will sit down with them again and he'll eat that meal with them. It's all focusing on him. Now, as I read the verses this morning, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like you to notice over and over again the word preparations. And I want you to know that he is the one in charge of the preparations. And I also want you to note that there is a code name here in the passage. It wasn't just Queen Elizabeth and other kings who have code names that really signal, put something into action. Even in this passage, there's a code. It's a code about a man carrying a pitcher. And that's going to be the signal that this is where we go and this is where we eat. Listen as I read our passage. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. And wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?'" That's the code. "And he himself will show you a large upper room furnished and ready. Prepare for us there." The disciples went and came to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when it was evening, he came with the 12. As they were reclining at the table and eating, Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, that one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be grieved and to say to him one by one, "Surely not I." And he said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who dips with me in the bowl. For the Son of Man is to go just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born." And while they were eating, he took some bread, and after blessing, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take and eat. This is my body." And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." So this morning, I want us to walk through this passage, which is a passage on preparations. Preparations for a Passover. Preparations to inaugurate a meal that he wanted them to use to continually remember what he had done, and to prepare them in preparation for a day that is coming when he will once again join them for that meal. Now, my greatest concern here is that you know the passage too well. And you know it so well, you might just quickly skim over it. You might not really be captured and captivated and somehow gripped by what is actually taking place in this room. So here's what I would hope you would do. This is what I've done all week, right? I hope you would do this. I hope your prayer would go from your heart to God something like this: "Lord, help me to walk across the bridge of time and go back to then and there in this passage and really imagine and enter into what it must have been like to be at that meal with the Lamb of God." That you would really have a heart's cry that I just don't want to get it right, which I do, but I want to get it relatable. I want to know just really what it meant to them. It's kind of like that old hymn that says, "Help me to take it in, O Lord, what it meant to you, the Holy One, to bear away my sin." I mean, I know what you did, but I want to take it in. I want it to affect me the way you intended for it to be affected. And to do that, Mark begins by painting a scene for us. It's the Passover and unleavened bread. And as we've already read in verses 12 through 16, he sent them to prepare for him to eat the Passover. And remember, the Passover was that commemorative meal that the Jews celebrated to continually remember something God had done long ago when he miraculously rescued and freed them from the bondage and the slavery they were in Egypt. They could not free themselves. They were crushed under the load of the slavery, and only God could rescue and redeem them. And so at the yearly sacrifice, they would remember by getting their lambs. And Josephus says there's probably 250,000 lambs that were killed during this festival every year. 250,000 lambs were gathered, and as they did that, and they slaughtered that lamb, and they partook of that lamb, it was a reminder that back in that day, long ago, God freed them by taking the blood of the shed lamb, placing it on their doorpost, and when the death angel, the angel of judgment, would come into Egypt and judge, he would pass over them, thus Passover, because he saw the blood. It was only because an animal had taken their place, shed its blood, that they were able to know, I am secure and I am safe from the judgment of God that is coming. And so every year they would gather and they would do this. Now it's really important to remember that these animals that were sacrificed in thousands of Jewish homes at that time in the city of Jerusalem were more than just your go to the meat market and buy a piece of meat. Often these were pets that they brought with them. Animals they had raised, who had lived among them, who they were familiar with. And that night, that one that, like most people would be with animals and pets, were close to, would give its life. in their place. And so this celebration had gone on for thousands and thousands of years, and tens of thousands of people would be observing that Passover at Jerusalem at this time. And so Jesus says to them, to his disciples, they ask him, where do you want us to go and prepare for the Passover? So look again at verses 13 and 15. We read that, and it's just a reminder that Jesus has already prepared a place for this to take place. Some people think that verses 13 to 15 is an indication of the omniscience and the foreknowledge of God. Others think it's good planning. I think it's good planning. It's not to say he doesn't have foreknowledge. I don't think that's what this is about. What it is saying is he is thinking of them. He is thinking of this evening, this meal, which will be a Passover unlike any that they've ever observed. Think about this. Jesus living with these disciples and them walking with him for these past 3 years. They've observed the Passover already a couple of times, but this night is different. This is not just another Passover meal. This is the Passover meal with the Lamb, the one who will die in their place. This is one like none other. And so he goes and he sends someone to prepare, to get a place ready for them, and then they come. And we see that what that's telling us is he is taking care of everything. It says in verse 16, the disciples went out after he had given them this code, this kind of sign. And really, by the way, it would be an unusual thing in that day for a man to be carrying a pitcher. I don't really want to in any way diminish you women, but that was a woman's task in that day. You only saw the women carrying the pitchers. I see that in Africa all the time. Still cultures where the women are going to get water and they're carrying the water pitchers. So this became that sign that he set up, Jesus set up, so that when you see this man, you'll know this is the place. And so verse 16 says, and he himself will show you, in verse 16, the disciples went and came to the city and found it just as he had told them. The operation was a man carrying the pitcher will be the place. That's where we will go. And when we go there, this is going to be something that will prepare us for an evening that is going to change everything for the future. So this atmosphere is one of celebrating. It's one of remembering rescue and deliverance from the past. And it's meant to be something that is a celebration, a sense of which joy would be filling their heart, that we are where we are because God rescued us. And we remember our history of who we are and where we are because of that. And so he's prepared for that. But something happens in verse 17. Jesus drops a bombshell in the midst of that evening, which is an evening of celebration. It's very commemorative. It's to teach them and remind them, like traditions are intended to do, what has happened. And then in verse 17, he drops a bombshell. When it was evening, he came with the 12, and they were eating and reclining at the table. And Jesus said, truly I say to you that one of you will betray me. And so now we see another thing he is predicting. It's a prophecy. It's something that is about to unfold. And he says that one of you will betray me. Now, that doesn't shock you like it does them. Because when you read that verse, you already know before you get down to the end of the story who it is. Because even in the Gospel of Mark, when the disciples, the 12, are introduced, in Mark chapter 3, we are told about Judas, and he's described as the one who betrayed him. So you already know from the beginning of the Gospel who the betrayer is. But they don't. Put yourself in that room. You're with the Son of God. He's told you, go prepare. This is an important place. This is an important night for us. There's joy, there's celebration. They don't know what's coming. All they know is this is the time of festivity and delight. And now you drop this bombshell on us and you tell us that one of us is going to betray you. So they, verse 19, began to be grieved and to say to him one by one, surely not I. And you imagine there's Peter going, no, Lord, it can't be me. And James and John and Matthew, they're all saying it one by one. And don't overlook what the text is saying. Judas is even saying it. Oh, no, it's not me, is it? I mean, if all of them are saying it and he doesn't say it, they're going to say, wait a minute, whoa, you didn't say it. It's you, buddy. We know it's you. No, they had no clue. This is a shocking, bombshell dropping moment for them. And Jesus says, no, Peter, it's not you. James, it's not you. Matthew, no, it's not you. He doesn't just keep going down the line and go, it's you. He doesn't do that. He then says something to them that's really interesting, which highlights the incredible depth of the betrayal of Judas. Verse 20, and he said to them, it is one of the 12, one who dips with me in the bowl. Now listen, eating in their day was not like us going to Burger King and getting a hamburger, right? It wasn't just like running out and picking up some food and eating. This was deep and important to them. It was a time where they shared with those they loved and should be loved by. It's a time they shared and enjoyed intimacy and closeness with each other. And this here is a moment that's reflecting what the psalmist prophesied in Psalm 41:9. Where it says that even my close friend and whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. I mean, think of this. Here they are. Is it me? What if it's me? What if I'm the one that's going to betray you and deny you? What if it's me? We've all been dipping our bread in the bowl with you. And to hear that it's a dear, close friend, someone who he had had intimate fellowship and communion with, is going to do that. So when Jesus said what he said, it was his way of saying it's a friend. It's someone who shares the meal, and that makes the deed even worse. Now, let's look at the last part of this scene here. There's preparations. Jesus is going. He's in charge. He's making sure that everything is in place. He's got the place picked. He's got the code so they know where to go and who to find. Prophecy is unfolding here. He's going to be betrayed. And then notice the plan as it unfolds here. For the Son of Man is to go just as it is written of him. Now pause right there. What Jesus is saying, and should just rock your world. You're just hours away from being arrested and beaten and mocked. Your side pierced with spears. Nails placed in your hand. And what you're thinking of, it's written. What that's saying is, God is in control. This is all unfolding the way he prepared it all. Long before time began and eternity passed, the triune God had gathered and had determined that the Son would come and this day would happen and he would be there in that room. And his life is marked by that realization. It is written. This is exactly what God has planned. There's no there is no victim here who in the end turns out as the great hero. No, he is absolutely 100% in charge that night in that room. He's aware of what Judas is doing and it doesn't shake him. He knows that he's going to be arrested soon and all that you can imagine is going to be experienced by him. He knows, and it does not shake him because he knows it is written. That's exactly what God has planned. When he says, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. That's Mark's way of saying to us that what Judas did was his own choice. Don't let your mind run down this road and say, oh, okay, so Judas couldn't help it. He was predestined to do that. That's not what the passage is telling us. It's keeping us in that balance of God's sovereign purpose and plan working out, which one would betray him, and Judas choosing, and he fulfills exactly the purpose and plan of God. Now, all I need to do is know they both exist. I don't have to reconcile them in my head. And to try to do that is to go down the wrong path and get caught up on a whole conversation that takes your eyes off of who's in charge here. And when he did that, having dipped his bread in that, and Jesus said, this is the one who is going to do what he's going to do, it's just his way of warning and reminding the one who is going to betray that his choice was a deed of hate, a rejection of a friend. But Judas wouldn't hear it. Judas's heart is hardened. He is not listening to those words. The scriptures are not affecting him at all. So on the one hand, the Son of God is calm. He's in control. He's aware this is not a messed up night. This is the night that's been planned. And on the other hand, Judas not listening, not caring to the pleas, the overtures, but actually going to do what he would do. John in chapter 13 describes the same night, but informs us of something here at this point that is very, very important. John 13 tells us that when Jesus had dipped the bread and gave it to Judas, after this Satan entered his heart, that is Judas, and Jesus said to him, what you are doing, do it quickly. So after receiving the piece of bread, Judas left immediately, and it was night. So what that tells us that what's about to happen in the table here, the Lord's table, the communion, Judas is not a part of that. It's now 11, which is why we always say at the end of these services when we're doing our communion that this is a table that is for his family, for his children. If you're not a Christian, this is not the table that you are to come to. In fact, there's strong warnings to not come to that table, and we remind you of that over and over again. So, as we look at that scene, if we don't draw this conclusion, we've missed the point. The point is, don't take your eyes off of Christ. Don't take them off of Jesus. The story is not about the disciples. It's not about Judas and all those questions that come up about him, as I said, in predestination issues. It's about Jesus. He's the one who is in charge in this evening. It's not the religious leaders. It's not Judas. The disciples even going to meet the man, and the man with the pitcher, and the man preparing the room for them. It's not about them. They're just all a part of this scene of what we should get, and that is Jesus is in charge. Don't take your eyes off of that. Don't lose that. He's just hours away from the cross. And the full fury of God's just wrath is going to fall on him for your sin, for my sin, for the sins of a world. And all he is doing is showing that he is absolutely living because it's written to fulfill and please his Father. He's very aware of that. He's in control. They are not. So, as we just transition out of this to these last few verses here, I just got to ask you this question in your life. In the chaoses of your world that are unfolding, you're not the son of God, but you are a child of God. You have become sons and daughters of God through Christ. When chaos comes into your world, when things seem to be going ways that don't look good to you, when people are against you, when situations are not going the way you would think they are, where are your eyes? Where's your focus? Where's your heart? What do you see? Do you see a Jesus who is in control? A Jesus who is in charge? That's the Savior we have here. And we move from the scene to the last thing, and that's the supper. And while they were eating, he took some bread, and when he had taken a cup. Now again, you and I probably just don't grasp the depth of what's going on here. Remember, it's the Passover meal. And at the Passover meal, it's a setting in which they are remembering the deliverance of the people of God from Egypt by the shed blood of a lamb. And in that evening, there are all kind of pieces of things that are used in the Passover meal. And so when it says here in the verse, they were eating, that means they were eating the Passover meal. And when it says he took some bread, you should ask yourself the question, what bread? And when it says, and he took a cup, what cup? Just any old cup? All those are essential. And they know what's going on. They understand the Passover meal. They know what they are celebrating. And so he takes, first of all, this element of bread from the Passover meal. And he would have prayed like all Jews prayed, but this is the Son of God, this is the Savior praying. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Takes that bread, offers that thanks, offers that blessing, as verse 22 says. And then it says, and he gave it to them. And the way the text reads is, he gave it to them individual. Here's Peter, James, John, Matthew. And in doing that, he is personalizing, this is something I'm doing for you. Handed it to them personally, and he said, take, eat, this is my body. This is my body. Now that was a sharp departure from the Passover. They'd never heard that before. Ever. They'd never heard it before. And he said, this is my body. Take and eat it. Now, I don't have time, and we can talk about this later, but that statement has caused all kind of havoc among all kind of churches. Catholics, Reformed, Lutheran, Baptist, you name it, all trying to figure out, what do you mean by this is my body? Well, let me just put it to you this way. His body is right there, the bread's right here. It's two separate things. Right? And Luke informs us that really this is what he said, this is my body which is broken for you. It's a representative of something. It's a reminder of what is broken for you. And he says to them, you do this as you do in remembrance of me. Why? Because just like the Passover, they are doing something that reminds themselves of the great salvation that God has provided for them. Like the blessing he prayed, the King of the universe who brings forth bread from the earth. He is now saying in so many words, I am that bread. I am that one whose body has been brought forth, as Galatians 4 says, in the fullness of times God brought forth his Son. I'm that one in this room with you tonight. That bread that you picked up and you've eaten so many times, tonight is a different night. Tonight is the night in which I want you to know I'm that bread. I'm going to die in my body. It's going to be crushed. It's going to be beaten. It's going to be broken. That's the body that you should remember. And often as you do this, he says, you do this in remembrance of that. And then he takes a cup quickly. Now again, there's 4 cups on the table in the Passover meal. And those 4 cups are reminders of what they knew and they remembered from Exodus 6, verses 6 and 7, whenever God had promised them that he would rescue them out of Egypt and the Passover would take place. 4 things he would do. 1, he said, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. 2, I will deliver you from their bondage. 3, I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. And 4, then I will take you for my people and I will be your God. Those 4 statements represent the 4 cups. Each one, take the cup. And you remember, he is the one who took you out of the burden and the bondage of Egypt. Cup 2, I have delivered you. Cup 3, I will redeem you. Cup 4, you'll become my people. And most people believe that when it says he took the cup, he took the 3rd cup. And he turned that 3rd cup of the outstretched arm with great judgment, saying, through the judgment that is about to fall on me as I go to the cross, bearing your sin, it's through that I will redeem you and I will rescue. And then he tells them why. Because this is the blood of the covenant. Matthew adds that it's for our forgiveness of sins. But Mark focuses on a covenant. What is that about? Well, that covenant is what he wants us to remember as we come to the table. Yes, it is his blood that was shed, but what is that blood for? It's a blood to inaugurate a covenant. And though we will not take time, we will just give you a couple references here that are there. I would love for you to just spend some time soaking your heart and mind in the reality of what it says for us in Exodus chapter 24. That first covenant, the original covenant with the people of God, the children of Israel, was ratified by blood. And at the end of that covenant, do you remember what they said to him? All that you have commanded us to do, we will do. But they couldn't, and they couldn't because they didn't because they couldn't do it. Because of their own wicked, deceived, fallen heart. It was because of their sinful flesh, their desperately wicked heart, that though they said, all that you command us we'll do, they never could do. And so century upon century, they are reminded constantly that somebody else has to die in your place. That lamb's blood has to be shed. And on this night, he is telling them that something else that was promised in the Old Testament is happening as it is in Jeremiah 31. Just listen to these glorious words. Jeremiah is telling them, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant. I made the old, you said you would keep it, but you were unable to. It's impossible for you to keep it. But I'm making a new covenant with you, the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day that I took them from the hand by hand to bring them out of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I'll put my law within them, and their heart I will write it on it, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Thousands of years have passed, and now that night in that room there they sat, seeing it fulfilled. A covenant whose blood ratifies it, which means that we are no longer under the bondage and the guilt of our sin. Wow. A gospel that Hebrews talks about where it says we have a high priest who has offered himself in our place, and it's not with the blood of bulls and goats, it says, but it's with his own blood, this covenant which he has made with us who have believed on Christ. And it's through this covenant, Hebrews tells us, let us draw near with confidence. He's ratifying that. He's giving them this reminder of this covenant so that they will remember that this is a reminder of two things. Your sins are no longer something I have against you and hold over you and will judge and condemn you for, because I'm going to take it in your place. And he'll give you a new heart. He'll write his law on your heart. You know what that means? That means that he changes the inside of a person. That covenant is about not only forgiving us, but changing us. When God changes a human being, that heart now that once loved the things of this world, that loved its sins, that loved its pleasures, and hated and cared nothing for God, that heart changes to where now it starts loving things that it never loved before, and it starts hating stuff that it used to love. You've experienced that. I've experienced that. It's the changing of the heart through the new covenant. And when it all ends, here's what he says to them. Truly I say to you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. The other gospel writers say things like this. Jesus says, I longed to eat this meal with you. He longed for, he craved, he deeply desired to eat this meal, to inaugurate it with them. Because he's not only thinking now what that new covenant is going to be, and the joy and the freedom and the delight and the reconciliation of sinners with God, but he's thinking forward to the day when he's going to come again and he's going to actually observe that fellowship time again with them. He's seeing, Jesus is, what John will tell them about in the book of Revelation called the great marriage feast of the Lamb. That day of joy, that day of celebration. Now, we are way out of our time, and I'm going to wrap it up so Will can come and do this. But here's what I want us to see in this section. In the first scene, we see that Jesus is in charge. He is the only one running things that night. It's not the evil leaders. It's not Judas. It's not the man preparing the room with the pitcher he carries. It's not The disciples, it's Christ. He's in charge. And now, at this table, he says to them, I welcome you to the table. In fact, I desire to be with you at the table. I desire to eat this meal with you, not just now, but in that world to come when I come again. I want to eat that meal with you. Now, it doesn't take long for us to kind of really realize how shocking that must be. And how overwhelming it should be to us to realize he knows everything about the 11 there. He knows that just in a few hours, all of them will abandon him. All of them will forsake him. Peter will say 3 times, I don't know him. Peter will get angry and he'll start cursing. And yet in this room that night, he's saying, I really wanted to eat the meal with you. Not like I want to eat it with people who's got it all right. Someone said, this table is not a table of merit. It's a table of grace. Now put yourself in that place. You think about your sin. Today, yesterday, last week, last month, last year, last decade. And there's everything about that that should make you feel shame and guilt because of the weight of our sin. But he intends for you to know, I welcome you. I welcome you through the blood. That covenant that I've ratified through my blood. That's forgiven you your sin. That's given you a new heart to love him, to want to please him. No, not perfectly. You've got your failures. You'll fail just like every other person has ever done as a child of God. But that shouldn't keep us at a distance from this table. That table should be a reminder to remember something. I'm a part of a new covenant. Sins forgiven, a new heart to love and follow him. I couldn't help but think this week as I watched the service of Queen Elizabeth that there were a couple individuals who were there, but they weren't really welcomed there. And as the funeral and everything unfolded, and as they began to really celebrate and remember all the things about her, you'll remember that there were these 2 people, Harry and Meghan, who seemed to be not quite welcomed there. That's just the opposite of this table. We are welcomed. We should come. You should come. If you're not a believer, you should have utter terror in your soul to think about the only way to be reconciled to God is through Christ. And if you've not received that, you've rejected that, your soul should be in utter big trouble and concerned. Because the only way to our God is through Christ, which this table points us to. It's only through his blood that forgiveness takes place. It is only through his blood that your heart can be changed to now be one of the people of God. And I pray if that's not true of you, that would be true at some point. And then you would know he would welcome you and he would invite you, and look forward to that day as well when he will eat that meal again together with his people. Let's pray.